everyone, we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince.
And on the program today we have Pastor X. Pastor, thanks for coming with us.
My pleasure.
Today we're going to talk... Vince, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Okay, today we're going to be talking about Silver Age comics, and specifically the resurgence of Silver Age. The fact that Silver Age seems to have whittled its way into all of comicdom and taken everything over. And we have Pastor on the program today because Pastor is a big fan of Silver Age and really knows his stuff. And Pastor, who would you say you read the most?
Aquaman. The
Really?
original Aquaman. The only Aquaman that counts. no phony thing on his hand, no weird long hair and beard, but the original Arthur Curry.
So every other Aquaman has problems with addition and subtraction.
Well said.
Subtraction, the new word in the dictionary.
What other stuff were you reading?
Oh, you name it. The Flash, Green Lantern, the Metal Men, Metamorpho, everything. Mostly DC. That's what I think of when I think of Silver Age.
And we're finding, you know, a lot of the stuff that was in the Silver Age that, you know, people these days that didn't grow up with that stuff, that weren't around at that point, would consider silly, is being used now, and they're trying to make it more serious. And examples of things like, oh, I don't know, Crypto the Superdog showing up in Hush back in the early 2000s, and things like that, you know what I mean? Things that you could never imagine being used in a serious sort of way.
A Hong Kong Phooey comic book. There was one out within the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years.
Was it serious?
I think it was.
What?
They made him look a little like a Ninja Turtle if a Ninja Turtle were a dog.
Does this mean Fangface is coming back too? That would be...
Who's Fangface?
Well, you know, with the Wolfman being out right now. Fangface was sort of a rip-off of the Scooby-Doo gang. He was a baby werewolf who grew up and had a couple of gang members, and they rode around the country in a convertible solving crimes.
That's hilarious. I want to see this.
Hanna-Barbera.
So I mean, how do you guys feel about this? The fact that we're not really even inventing a lot of new characters anymore. We're just going back to kind of basics, and then trying to make people who were silly kind of serious. I mean, like, do you think this is just we can't come up with anything good, or is it because we're obsessed with nostalgia? What do you think it is?
I think that we have this pool that we draw from. And by we, I mean the general status of society. But we all have these... I mean, in fact, most of the characters that you mentioned were characters that are still being used and have been used for years since their creation.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, that's true.
I would almost say that part of this isn't nostalgia. It is indeed not creativity. But part of this is just trying to get as much as you can out of one particular mental property. I mean... Lucas is a master of this, so why shouldn't the comics medium be?
Well, and if you think about it, Disney made a really big deal out of that when they bought Marvel, and they said, you know, we're buying 5,000 characters. Well, you're actually buying a staff that could create more.
The people who own the companies, their bottom line is they just want to make money, and they'll put out anything to sell product. A lot of times you'll find the artists and the writers who grew up during the Silver Age, younger than me, obviously, but they have fond memories of characters they encountered in the 80s. And given a chance to go back and to reboot them or to re-image them, they'll jump at it, and you'll find a lot of the guys that you watch and read getting a chance to go back and retooling a character from the '60s is something they've actually been waiting for.
You know, that's a really good point. How long do you think this could possibly last?
Video? I'm guessing about 10 minutes.
How long do you think that this resurgence of Silver Age obsession will last? Because a lot of, I mean, like for instance, what is it? Identity Crisis? Trying to make Captain Boomerang a serious character. Things like this. Yeah, you know what I mean? But what they're doing is they're kind of acting like the characters are older now, and they were the way they were when they were written back in the 60s and 70s, right? And then they've grown up now. And how long can this kind of thing last? We're going to have to move away from it at some point, because ultimately enough years will get between that where it won't make any sense anymore.
Well, you know, continuity is a problem, and I didn't know they were doing that. I didn't know they were writing the story with the backstory staying the way it was.
Yeah, and that's not the way they're always doing it, but that's one of the best examples of it doing that way is Identity Crisis, and Identity Crisis popularity is what led to Infinite Crisis and those other books, I think.
You know, an interesting fictional parallel here, I think, is the Watchmen. I mean, if you look at the older characters, they have of course, we see that the characters aren't necessarily as innocent as we would see from that time, but they're very well marketed within the continuity as being the old type superheroes. But as we see, things progress and become more and more disturbing. So I think that's kind of or darker, however you wish to say it.
This has really become the air quote show, hasn't it?
I think it's a good thing. Going back to taking a page from your book, Captain, as long as a story is a good story, character-driven, well told, well illustrated, I think, what are there, only 27 plots or 47 plots in existence, and stories are simply retold using the same the same elements. You've seen these ideas of sequels, starting with Spielberg and the Indiana Jones movies, going back to the pulps. Really, it's an invention of modern contemporary media, telling stories using the same characters and just having a series of stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
They didn't do that in the 19th century. Every novel that was written was a new novel, for the most part.
And sometimes comic book fans kind of think that that's the only medium that does it, and they kind of forget that it's not. I mean, 007 is not a continuity. And what's interesting about Bond, not that I'm a giant Bond fan, what's interesting about Bond is that everybody's calling this new stuff a reboot, but that wasn't a continuous continuity.
And even Arthur Conan Doyle with Sherlock Holmes, telling stories with the same character, tried to kill the character, and the fans brought him back. So I don't know that there's anything wrong with reaching back to characters that were created in the late 50s or the 60s and simply retooling them.
I'm not sure there's anything wrong with it either. I do think that eventually it's going to get old, like anything. When they've done it with everybody, you know what I mean, and that I would like to start seeing some more new characters popping out that can become as popular as other older characters. You know what I mean? Because it's not like in the last 30 years we haven't had new characters that have become immensely popular. I mean, Venom was a product of the 80s. So there are examples of that. I'd really love our generation to have one of those. And by our generation, I guess I'm talking about me and Vince, but sorry.
No, that's true. Yes.
Because you're like, well, my generation had all kinds of them. I don't know what you're talking about.
Which generation is Pastor X from? Generation X. Indeed. Sorry.
The big boom.
The big boom.
Well, Vince, how do you feel about this? I mean, are you enjoying these kind of stories, or are you wanting us to move past this thing?
I think as long as they find characters that I have a particular interest in, or they can make interesting, I'm cool with it. I mean, personally, I prefer them going back to the old 40s stuff. So the stuff that's coming out from Dynamite right now, I'm reading the Lone Ranger was fantastic. Zorro's pretty good, except for Zorro Matanz's "Stop It." But it's good stuff.
I doubt they're watching this.
I doubt it too. But I think it's worth doing, and I think it's worth doing well, because I think if you go back to a character that's long since been killed off or long since been out of the public eye, if you can't make it interesting and fun and worth reading, not necessarily dark.
Keep them dead.
Yeah. I mean, what they're going to do is they're going to ruin that character for a particular generation. They're going to go, oh, Daredevil? Who's that? And I don't mean the 60s Daredevil. I mean the Daredevil that's... There's one out for Image right now. Dynamite has a Daredevil series.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm sorry, I brought up the one that has another name. He has a multicolored suit and a spiked belt. It's really awkward looking. But I haven't read a good one with him.
You bring up an interesting point, Vince, and that is your Daredevil is not my Daredevil. When I think of Matt Murdock, I'm thinking the 1960s run with Gene Colan, at the pencil.
Yeah, and my Daredevil starts with Frank Miller.
Right. So I would object to taking Silver Age characters and so drastically altering their personality and their personas that you're completely destroying what they were to a generation of people who are still here and who still have parts of their collection.
Sure. So what you're saying is that this has kind of been going on since the 80s already, with things like Dark Knight and all that jazz.
Yeah.
I'd say that too.
And something else that I find interesting, I just want to say, at that time, Dark Knight, The Watchmen, and The Shadow, Blood, and Judgment came out. And what's interesting about The Shadow, Blood, and Judgment is The Shadow, Blood, and Judgment did for The Shadow what Batman Begins did for Batman. Took it back and given it a backstory, all happened around in snowy mountainous areas. So I thought that would be interesting to say. Anyway, moving on.
Well, folks, we are all out of time. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have other ideas of things that we might debate about or have a discussion about in the future, please leave that in the comments below. And thanks a lot for coming.
My
Pastor,
pleasure.
Pastor X.
Thank you.
And by the way, for people who are wondering, Pastor X is a real pastor. He's a Lutheran pastor, and
now I'm playing one on TV. On YouTube.
And he actually is my pastor. We're friends, and he's my pastor. We will have you on the show again, and also check out our podcast because we'll be having Pastor on the podcast this week talking about other things. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince.
I'm Pastor X.
And we'll see you next time on Geeks Not Nerds.